In one of my previous videos, I turned a portion of the first episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender into a comic series. And today, I'll do that thing again. I'm gonna continue onward where we last left our characters. In this particular case, they were left staring at a giant iceberg featuring our very own bald, adolescent senior citizen. I plan on capturing the Avatar. I plan on capturing the moment from when Aang is freed from the iceberg, all the way to our trio finding their way back home. To start, I did a rough sketch which features about 19 pages. Spoiler alert, I did end up removing one of the pages because I didn't quite like how it turned out, so 18 pages. Overall, I was pretty happy with how the previous chapter turned out. There were a few complaints I had, which hopefully I'll address within this chapter. One of the issues was how little I ended up utilizing comic panels. I felt like there were a lot more I could have captured with more of these boxes, so I'll try to incorporate them better here. Ultimately, I tried to follow the story's flow pretty closely while adding my own flair to the drawings and the framing. Let me know what you end up thinking of it at the end. The outline and rough sketch layers ultimately took a decent amount of time, and while I was feeling a little tired, I was super excited to take a bite into the meat of the drawing, which is the inking and the coloring. But before we get into that, it would be awesome if you can take some time to leave a like and click subscribe. But if anything, I just hope you enjoy watching this video. Let's continue onwards to each page. The first page mainly covers Aang's avatar spirit waking up inside the iceberg and Katara making a heroic dash towards him to free this, stranger. It's a good thing this isn't a horror movie, otherwise Katara would not survive that long. If you watched my previous video, you would know that this was a page I wanted to end the first chapter on, but I'm glad I left it for the start of the second chapter, mainly because I liked how the last page of the first chapter turned out, but also just because it's a pretty good starting off point. Instead of having Aang be the main focal point, I really wanted to get a bigger full-body shot of our two siblings reacting to this phenomenon of a person. Like before, I used the colors from the show and it was nice not having to worry about something like that for the most part. The next page has Katara playing Frogger across the Berkey bits as she violently knocks on the iceberg's frozen door. I wanted to do a decent amount of paneling because I felt like none of these sequences were major enough to warrant a big picture moment. I did like how I drew Katara winding up to break the ice with Sokka's club, but instead of giving her a couple of attempts like in the show, I felt it wasn't necessary to show that and once was good enough. Then on the bottom panel, I can have the eruptive impact from the club take over the rest of the page. Another issue I had with my previous chapter attempt was the overuse on these full single page panels. The thought process here was to highlight these significant moments, but as Syndrome and Dash say,
and when everyone's super!
Which is another way of saying no one is.
And the same thing applies here. So for this chapter, I wanted to pick and choose the full page panels, and I think this is a good place to start. I wanted the main focus to be on this giant beam emanating out from the iceberg as the Avatar spirit gets unleashed onto the South Pole as a giant lightsaber looking beam of, well, light. I was a bit nervous because I'm not that experienced when it comes to doing lineless drawings. I guess shout out to another video of mine where I draw through the alphabet and I do attempt that style. But anyways, I'm happy I attempted this lineless style because it makes everything really pop compared to the previous pages. After using many different shades of blue, it was time to show our antagonist. These next two pages with Zuko and Iroh, I'm going to admit are not my favorite. If I could go back, I would have put more focus on these panels and put a bit more detail, but it's a bit too late for that now. For the first of this 2-page Zuko special, I had Zuko spotting the beam as his back is faced towards us. Then the next page is some back and forth with him and Uncle Iroh, and I crammed the page with speech bubbles so we can quickly go back to the action on the little iceberg. After all, we'll be seeing a lot more of these characters in the future, so I wanted to focus on Aang yet again. Back to the siblings, and this is where we finally get the meeting between Katara, Sokka, and Aang. This top panel is honestly one of my favorite drawings. I just really love how it turned out. That's not to say I didn't love how the rest of the page turned out. I wanted to put a lot of time in the middle here and make Aang seem a lot more menacing than he admittedly is. Unless you muzzled Appa, then for sure Aang is pretty menacing. I think adding these lights in the sky and the little glowy beams add to the overall ambiance of the page, so I'm really happy with how everything is turning out so far. Aang's menacing act doesn't last that long as he succumbs to the 2013 sci-fi movie starring Sandra Bullock and George Clooney. Let me know if you get the reference. This page went by pretty smoothly and honestly, it took almost no time at all. However, I didn't really like how I ended up drawing this one, so near the end of this whole project, I ended up going back to this drawing and I just redid the page. This was that scenario I mentioned in the beginning of the video where I felt like I underutilized the comic panels in the first chapter, so I'm making sure to incorporate them a lot more, and I'm really glad I did, because this looks so much better. A miraculous Katara catch later, and we have an unconscious Aang being poked by Sokka's stick. I guess phrasing. This is another page where I loved how it ended up turning out. I contemplated leaving out the part where Sokka pokes Aang with the butt of his spear, but I felt like I had to keep it in to show some of Sokka's, character, and I'm really glad I did because it lets the page flow nicely from one section to the other, and from there we get some dialogue while Aang wants to go penguin sledding with Katara. This middle panel did feel a little bit too long, like literally, so I ended up adding another mini box with a confused Aang, and I think it's such a nice addition. There's not much else to say about this page, but I'm just really happy with how it turned out. The next one was a fun one, because not only do we get to see Appa, but we get to see Sokka who gets to see Appa, and his reaction was so much fun. After working on this canvas for a bit, I felt like I should try to add another panel on the bottom, with Aang trying to wake Appa up from his century-long slumber. And tell me I'm wrong, but I think it sort of completes the whole page and removes some of the blank spaces, which is just a net positive in my opinion. So far, the chapter was coming along very nicely. Of course, we can't have too many nice things happening all at once. Basically, I'm not the biggest fan of how these next few pages turned out. I got a bit lazy when it came to the framing and the poses of this page. There's not much really to say here, so let's just move along. And the next two pages, I basically tried to attempt to do a spread shot across the two canvases. I thought it might be fun to do a shot like this with Appa's snot traveling across the middle of the book onto Sokka, but after taking some time and giving this one an attempt, I realized that I didn't really know how to do it properly. Although I still wanted something like this in my chapter, I felt like it didn't look good enough to leave it in, so I ended up just taking it out and figured it can just happen off screen. Sokka getting Appa's snot plastered all over his body is the second time we get to see Sokka being unlucky, the first being with the fish and the water, but this one was super fun to draw. I love these close-up drawings of the characters way more than the ones that take place further back. I'm really allowed to focus a lot more on these details, not to mention that snot just looks glorious. The backgrounds also came along fairly nicely, and at this point, I can draw these icebergs in my sleep. The next page doesn't have too much going on as we just have the characters introducing themselves, but the page after is where I had another bout of super fun drawing and coloring. Something about Aang's face as he's about to sneeze was just such a blast to draw, and I'm so glad I decided to add this little box here because it works as a good bridge between him introducing himself to flinging himself 20 feet in the air. I learned in school that what goes up must eventually come down, and that's exactly what happened to our flighty friend. After working through the whole page, I did end up feeling like something was missing. In the show, Sokka is super surprised that Aang flew 10 feet in the air, but Aang claims that he felt like it was higher than that. Originally, I felt it wasn't too necessary to add a comment like this into the comic, but I decided to add it back in because it shows that Aang jumping that high isn't unnatural to him, and it also acts as a good transition to when Katara exclaims that he's an airbender. Finally, we have 2 pages left of this chapter, and although this entire thing took me quite a lot of time, it was so much fun to do. I plan on at least finishing the first episode, so please stick around if you want to see that at the very least. On this page, we have Sokka making the decision to go back home where everything makes sense, except there's nowhere for him to actually go. Instead of doing this side view like in the show, I wanted us to get a back view of Sokka as we see what he sees, which is basically just endless ocean. Then on the last page in the show, there's a mini conversation that takes place about if Sokka wants to ride on Appa, or if he wants to wait till someone else comes along, but I thought it might be better to just do a full page drawing of Aang on Appa asking if they need a ride. It's a lot more seamless and ends the chapter in a much more intriguing note in my opinion. And, well, that's pretty much it for the main drawing portion of the video. I did take some time afterwards to fix up some of the faces and some poses, not to mention I added all the speech bubbles and dialogue at the very end. This was a very relaxing process now that I knew that I was mainly done, but it's finally time to showcase this chapter titled The Boy in the Iceberg. I think this one turned out so much better than the previous chapter, mainly due to the use of more panels. I also think it's visually more interesting going from the Avatar state glow to regular glow to switching up the environment with Zuko's ship. I will say as much as I love drawing these little icebergs and using this color scheme of just blue, I can't wait till these characters make their way to the village and eventually out of the South Pole. And eventually out of the South Pole, it's going to be a lot more fun drawing these different environments. I'm also happy with the changes I decided to make from my original outline, or I guess storyboard sketch. Adding the little boxes that show Aang's reaction or the dialogue really help the overall feel of the comic stay closer with the show, and going forward I'm going to need to think a bit more clearly on how to lay out these boxes a bit more efficiently, instead of kind of free-flowing it like I've been doing. I did mention earlier that I do plan on working through the first episode at the very least because it's been a lot more fun than I expected, and I feel myself getting better with each video that I put out there, so I'm really happy to see the progress. All in all, I really like how all of this turned out, and while there are still some pages or panels that I kind of don't like, this overall was a very solid drawing for me, and please leave a like on this video if you enjoyed, subscribe if you want to see more, and most importantly, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.